What happens to the souls of those who committed evil when they die? Wait until you hear what Carl Jung discovered about Hitler's psyche that will make you question everything you thought you knew about evil. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, when the world sleeps and darkness wraps around us like a shroud, we're haunted by one terrifying question. What becomes of those who embodied pure evil? Where do the souls of Hitler, Stalin, and countless murderers go when they leave this world? But here's what Jung found that nobody talks about, and it's more disturbing than any hell you could imagine. Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, who mapped the deepest territories of the human psyche, spent decades exploring this very question. What he discovered wasn't about divine punishment or eternal damnation. It was something far more complex, far more chilling, and paradoxically, more hopeful. According to Carl Jung, the psyche doesn't simply vanish at death. The patterns, the complexes, the archetypal energies that drove a person's actions, they persist in what he called the collective unconscious. But here's where it gets unsettling. Jung said something that will shake you to your core about where Hitler's consciousness went after death, and why it might still be influencing people today. Jung discovered that the human psyche operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The personal unconscious contains our individual traumas and repressions. But beneath that lies something vast and interconnected, the collective unconscious, where all human experiences merge into archetypal patterns. When someone commits acts of profound evil, Jung said, they don't just harm their victims. They wound the collective psyche of humanity itself. They activate what he called the shadow, not just their personal shadow, but the collective shadow of our entire species. But wait until you hear what Jung believed happens next. It's not what you think. Carl Jung said that after death, these dark psychological patterns don't disappear. Instead, they become what he termed autonomous complexes, independent psychological entities that exist within the collective unconscious. These complexes seek expression, seek to complete their unfinished psychological business. Think about it this way. Hitler's psychological patterns, his pathological need for power, his capacity for dehumanization, according to Jung, these don't just evaporate. They become part of humanity's psychological inheritance, waiting to manifest through other susceptible individuals. And here's the terrifying part Jung discovered about how these dark patterns choose their next victims. Jung observed that certain people become what he called possessed by archetypal forces. When someone's ego is weak, when they're psychologically unstable or spiritually hollow, they become vulnerable to these autonomous complexes from the collective unconscious. Carl Jung said, this explains why we see certain patterns of evil recurring throughout history. It's not reincarnation in the traditional sense, it's psychological inheritance. The same archetypal patterns of tyranny, genocide, and cruelty that possessed Hitler can possess others when conditions are right. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing about who these patterns target first. According to Carl Jung, these dark complexes are particularly drawn to individuals who share certain psychological characteristics with their original host. Someone with narcissistic tendencies, unresolved rage, or a desperate need for power becomes a perfect vessel for these ancient patterns of evil. Jung said we can recognize when someone is becoming possessed by such archetypal forces. Their personality changes dramatically. They develop an inflated ego, lose empathy, and begin to see other humans as objects rather than individuals. Sound familiar? Here's what Jung said about the early warning signs that still give psychologists nightmares. Carl Jung discovered that possession by these dark complexes follows predictable stages. First comes inflation of the ego. The person begins to believe they're special, chosen, superior. Then comes the dehumanization of others. They start categorizing people as either useful or disposable. Finally comes what Jung called identification with the archetype. The person no longer sees themselves as an individual, but as the embodiment of some greater force or destiny. This is when they become truly dangerous, capable of justifying any atrocity. But wait, Jung discovered something that changes everything about how we should respond to evil. According to Carl Jung, these dark archetypal patterns have a secret weakness that most people never realize. They cannot exist in the presence of integrated consciousness, a psyche that has acknowledged and integrated its own shadow. Jung said that when we refuse to acknowledge our own capacity for darkness, we become vulnerable to possession by these collective shadow forces. But when we courageously face our own darkness, when we integrate our personal shadow, we become immune to their influence. And here's Jung's most shocking discovery about how ordinary people can actually fight these forces. Carl Jung discovered that conscious awareness is like light to these shadow complexes. When enough individuals in a society become psychologically aware, when they integrate their shadows and develop what he called individuation, the collective unconscious itself begins to heal. Jung said this is why psychological work isn't just personal. It's a form of spiritual warfare against the archetypal forces of evil that plague humanity. Every person who becomes conscious, who integrates their shadow, who develops authentic selfhood, weakens the grip these dark patterns have on our collective psyche. But Jung's final revelation about evil souls will either terrify you or give you hope, maybe both. According to Carl Jung, even the darkest archetypal patterns contain within them the seeds of their own transformation. The shadow, when consciously confronted and integrated, becomes a source of tremendous creative energy and wisdom. Jung said that societies that learn to collectively process their shadow through art, ritual, honest dialogue about their dark impulses can actually transform these archetypal patterns of evil. What once possessed individuals destructively can be channeled into creative, life-affirming expressions. This means that Hitler's psychological legacy doesn't have to be one of pure destruction. If enough of us do the difficult work of shadow integration, we can literally transform the collective unconscious, healing the wounds that evil has left in humanity's psyche. So, here's the ultimate question Jung would want you to ask yourself. Right now, are you going to ignore your own shadow and remain vulnerable to these dark forces? Or will you courageously face your own capacity for darkness, integrate it, and become part of humanity's psychological immune system? Because according to Carl Jung, the fate of evil souls and the future of human consciousness itself depends on your answer. The choice is yours. The shadow is waiting, and so is the light.